Thank you very much, Senator Lesko, for the very warm introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm very proud to have written the foreword to Rich States, Poor States. I've been reading this book now for several years, and I think it has got a roadmap, and there are so many good ideas in it. I'm also happy to be able to have lunch here with Steve Moore, who I'm proud to say served on my transition committee, and people wonder where we got some of the lines like to drive the income tax as close to zero as possible. Well, you get that when you hang out with people like Steve Moore. I also want to say to Liz and to the good doctor, what powerful testimony. Not that I need reminding of why I ran for public office, but when I see the opportunity we have as elected leaders and legislators to clear the way so that our free market economy can produce innovators who can solve problems in public policy, it's a reminder to me of how much more bright the future can be. And when you talk about somebody who, we talk about the 5 C's a lot in Arizona. I like the idea of being a place where 2 more C's are cure cancer, and that we can be a hotbed for that. Well, Senator Lesko is right. We certainly accomplished a lot in this past session for Arizona, and we should expect more of the same going forward under this administration. So I want to say to Senator Lesko and everyone else here today that we realize that this past year has been a breath of fresh air for Arizona. It was the fastest legislative session since the moon landing. Mark Twain said, no man's property is safe. No man's life, liberty, or property is safe while the legislature is in session. But that's not always true. I think you need to give credit where credit is due. Our legislature actually expanded liberty for the citizens of Arizona, and we did it in a very business-like fashion. So I'm very grateful for that. People often ask, a lot of my friends in the business community like to say, can you get anything done in government? And I think evidence in Arizona is that we can. If you have a vision and a plan and you chart the course and you work with the other people that are involved, it's incredible what can be accomplished, and it's certainly a lesson that could be learned in Washington, D.C. for our leaders there. Debbie talked about my past life as the leader of Cold Stone Creamery, and I'd like to say that you do get a lot of undeserved popularity when you sell ice cream for a living. I also want you to know that all goes away when you balance the budget. I came into office with a $1 billion budget deficit. And I think one of the great things about running for governor is once that's over, there are a lot of other good governors around the country that you get to visit with. And there were some that were models for my campaign, but I went back to my first Republican Governors Association meeting, and one of the governors that I wanted to meet with was Rick Snyder, the governor of Michigan. And we sat down, and he said, Doug, tell me your biggest challenge in Arizona. And I said, Governor, we have a $1 billion budget deficit. And he looked right at me and he said, that's child's play in Michigan. He said, try taking your largest city through bankruptcy. So I think we see what the consequences are for poor leadership and poor public policy. And what we want to be here in Arizona and what I look to ALEC for is good ideas, good public policy, and then working with others in partnership in elective office to get this done. Not only did balancing the budget have good intended consequences for our state, we are now on the path to structural balance for the first time in nearly a decade. We've gone from having no money available to having $312 million in a cash carry-forward account and $458 million in our rainy day fund. Not only is this good financial sense, but it's our duty. It's our responsibility to our children to not leave them a pile of debt. And it's also our responsibility to the most vulnerable in our society, so that we can provide a social safety net that allows people a second chance or to get back on their feet. So I'm grateful to our legislature for helping us do that in the first year, and I think it's something we can be very proud about in Arizona. You know, our administration has been about thinking big. And a case in point is after the most successful Super Bowl that we were able to host here last year in the state, we were able to secure a $2 billion investment from Apple, the most successful company in the history of America. But the past has also been about helping the little guys, the small businesses with big ideas, bringing 21st century innovation into this 21st century economy. So we lifted regulations on innovative and successful companies. We did simple things like allowing our microbreweries to actually sell more beer rather than having to close down their restaurants. And this was only done by bringing our legislature and industry together. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of is the relationships that I've built inside our state government, and also the people I've brought on to my senior staff and agency heads. You know, the question is often, what's the biggest difference between the private sector and the public sector? And there's a lot of different ways you can answer that, but it's typically around that the private sector is focused on outcomes and results, and the public sector seems to be so focused on process, and it gets in the way oftentimes. But I think the one similarity, the biggest similarity between the private sector and the public sector is the reliance on people. You can't get anything done in the private sector if you don't have good people, and I'm going to tell you, you can't get the things done in the public sector if you're not working with good people who build trust and relationships. You come into office, you get elected on November 5th, and you've got a $27 billion combined budget, state and federal dollars. You have 35,000 state employees. You have 42 separate agency heads and 220 boards and commissions. There's a lot to accomplish during that transition time. But we had a real focus on people and putting the right people in the right places. There's a number of questions I like to ask people in my past life before I would bring them on board. It's really, who are you? What do you do? And how do you know if you're doing it well? And I typically like the response to be with a metric. You know, you can demonstrate that you're selling more ice cream to more people, more often, in more locations, so the franchisee is making more money. There's many of these jobs in the public sector you can also answer with a metric. Are we providing a better return on taxpayer dollars? Are more children learning to read at the third grade level? Are we graduating more kids? Are we reducing dropout rate? That type of thing. One of our agency heads, as we asked, how do we know if you're doing it well? His answer to us during the interview process was, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I am planning on shutting down Uber and Lyft by stinging them over Super Bowl week. I was surprised by the answer. This was in the first few weeks of the administration. It was also the first time as governor that I was able to consult my general counsel and say, what exactly is my power over agency heads? He replied that agency heads serve at the pleasure of the governor. And I want you to know that we have a new agency head. In the Department of Weights and Measures, and we've taken that attitude across our government. And what we did the next day was we lifted the regulations on Uber and Lyft. I spoke the next day to an education conference out on the Capitol lawn, and I got off the podium and was walking back into the Capitol, and the press was all there. I thought for sure that they would have a question about education. You would have thought that I had freed all the prisoners. They couldn't believe that an agency head was gone and that we had lifted these regulations, but it has been good for the state of Arizona. It has demonstrated to the rest of the country that we are open for business, and we did other good things, like passing crowdfunding legislation that will make it easier for startups to grow and thrive. And we even have passed ideas that allow us to consolidate, cut waste, and find savings wherever and whenever possible. I want you to know that between our state hiring freeze and efforts to consolidate our state government, we expect to save millions of dollars over this next fiscal year. And it's no accident that 2 of the world's top credit rating agencies have upgraded Arizona's credit outlook. S&P has even assigned Arizona the strongest rating since 2008. We're proud to see by our policies being implemented that our credit ratings are being upgraded and places like California and Chicago are being downgraded. There is a consequence for these financial decisions, and we're happy to see it here in the state of Arizona. I also want you to know that in March we addressed one of the most pressing tax issues facing Arizona by finally and permanently indexing our income tax to inflation. This was an important first step on our mission to reduce income taxes every year, and I'm glad we acted swiftly to get it done in the first few months of the year. And I see legislator Justin Olson here, who led that legislation. I want to say I'm thankful to you for that. And of course, our work continues even as the legislature adjourned, and we kept focused on what we needed to get done in the governor's office. The latest indicator that our pro-business economic efforts are paying off. A study in the Phoenix Business Journal just released last month ranks Arizona as a top 3 destination for companies fleeing California. And I want to thank my outside advisor, Jerry Brown, for his help. You know, California has lost more than $68 billion in capital investment as a result of companies closing up shop and looking for a more business-friendly environment. It doesn't take an economist to figure out why this is happening. While we're helping companies with reduced regulations and lower taxes here in Arizona, California is hemorrhaging them by the thousands. And the result is Arizona has been ranked as one of the best states in the country in which to do business, and California, for the 11th year straight, has been ranked as the worst state in the country in which to do business. Over the coming weeks and months, we're going to do more of this, and we're going to continue to stay focused on Arizona's highest priorities, including one of the most important policy issues in front of us for all of us at the state level and those that believe in federalism, and that's education. Education is a state responsibility, and I don't think it's something we can point our fingers and blame Washington for. Of course, they can give us more of our money back, but we still have our children in our schools, and we need to do what's right on their behalf. You hear a lot about where Arizona stands in terms of education, but the truth is we have some of the best public high schools in the nation in our state. We have 3 of the top 10 public high schools in the country. So we know how to educate a child here. What we want to do is do it more often in more places. Just recently, the National Assessment of Educational Progress released its report for 2015, and the results have been encouraging to the reforms that we have put into place, especially compared to the rest of the country. While scores decline nationally across the board, Arizona's have remained steady. This year, for the first time since we started taking the test in the 90s, Arizona students have met the national standard, and in one case, exceeded the national average score. Arizona's 8th graders edged out the national average in mathematics and just narrowly missed it while improving in reading. Arizona's 4th graders are barely below the national average in math, and we're closing the gap in reading. This is not an anomaly. What we're seeing here is a sustained trend of general improvement in academic results. And just like in the private sector, the real way to measure your business is how you do year over year. I think it's the same in education. Are you improving versus previous year? Now, there's always going to be more to be done when it comes to education, but our reforms that we're passing in our state are a crucial part of the equation, and the other part of that is resources and how we're spending those. My mission since day one has been to work with our legislature and the education community to get more money into our classrooms where it will make the biggest difference. We all know that difficult financial times require tough financial decisions. And our elected leaders have acted in good faith over the downturn. But the Great Recession was tough on a growing state like Arizona, and everyone did their best to respect the statutory commitments to education while also keeping our state government afloat. Well, in short, this all led to a 5-year-long lawsuit that has been hovering over the state of Arizona and hampering productive and cooperative discussions between elected leaders and education champions in our state. In my State of the State address, I actually called out very loudly that I wanted to see this lawsuit settled, that I believed it was time to stop paying lawyers and start paying teachers. Well, I want you to know that just over a month ago, Arizona passed an education funding plan that eliminates uncertainty about future education funding requirements and improves the state's ability to manage the budget. And we're doing all of this. We are pushing $3.5 billion in new money into K-12 education without raising taxes. So the highlight on that is $3.5 billion in additional dollars without raising taxes over the next 10 years. It will give educators and teachers the resources they've been asking for, and it also allows the flexibility of the executive branch and the legislature to protect our budget during periods of fiscal weakness. We do all of this without jeopardizing the long-term education finances. And again, I want to reiterate, we're able to do all of that without raising taxes and while keeping our budget structurally balanced. This could not have been done without a legislature that, one, has terrific leadership. I don't know if Senate President Andy Biggs and House Speaker David Gowan are here, but I want you to know that we had 100% of the Republican caucus in our legislature, along with the Democrats, who care about education, care about our kids, and care about what's happening in our classrooms, to vote yes on this proposal that not only puts supplemental funds into K-12 education, but settles our lawsuit. So thank you. Money's just one of the challenges that Arizona schools face, but it is an important one. And this plan is a monumental first step in giving our schools significant additional resources while keeping our promise to the hardworking Arizona taxpayer. I'm proud we could get this on the ballot. The battle's not done yet. We need to get a yes vote on May 17th, but it was this idea of good public policy and working together that allows us to be on offense between now and May 17th, talking about how you can help support our schools without raising taxes. And again, I can't tell you how grateful I am that I was able to work with other leaders that wanted to move public policy forward to solve a real problem in our state, and we're able to do that with a good campaign. All of what I've been able to share with you is only a snapshot to the great start we're off to in Arizona and the work that we're going to continue to do in at least the next 3 years that I have left. But I want to reiterate my pledge to all of you as fighters for limited government, free market principles, and federalism, as job creators, taxpayer watchdogs, policymakers, and public servants. This administration will continue to be one of kept promises and fulfilled priorities, of constant improvement and best practices, of educational excellence, economic development, and 21st century innovation. In short, of the values that bind us together in this conference. I want to thank you all for being here and for the good work that you do. Go forth. Go back and talk to your own governors about the good things that you're hearing here. Share good ideas with our legislators. I really am a believer from my background in business that these best practices are happening across our country. They just need to be reapplied more often in more of our states. Enjoy our conference. Enjoy Arizona. I want to wish you all Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and thank you for being here.